Hi everybody, it's Sam again. As I sit in bed, I think we should be good. Okay. I'm going to read the next chapter of The Shape of Water. Okay. Ready to go? Yes. My father lived underwater. My mother would say this to me, crossing her legs and laughing as we talked on her bed. She had a heart-shaped face, and when she smiled, her entire face smiled. Her cheeks rounded and her eyes split into crescents. You had to smile looking at her. I have to tell him how he feels, she would tell me. He doesn't know sometimes, and I can look at him and read his face as easily as a book. I say, Michael, you're so angry, or Michael, why are you worried? He looks at me, astonished. He thinks I'm a witch. When you play your harp records, he says witch's brew is in the air. My mother smiled. He likes harp music too. He just doesn't remember. I remember. That's my job, to remember it all. She put her arm around me. I want you to stop worrying. There's dark water in your soul, Lena, and you can't keep letting the dark water blot out the light. She rubbed my shoulders. We were talking about my breasts. Only you would think such a thing. Cancer, imagine. She shook her head. A tender, swollen knob had lodged in the center of my right breast. I woke up that morning and instinctively put my hand to my breast. At breakfast, I asked my mother to make an appointment for me. I knew cancer grew in lumps. I had seen a poster of the 7 warning signs while riding the Staten Island ferry. Let me see, she said after I told her what I had found. She looked carefully. This is not cancer. This is development. You're at that age now, nearly 13. Your cells are going berserk, that's all. To calm me down, we sat on her bed with the door shut, eating ice cream. It was a Saturday, and my father had gone to Manhattan with Hannah to help her buy a sofa, so we didn't have to explain our indulgence. It was kind of a celebration, but one that would only be understood by me and my mother. We were celebrating that I didn't have cancer, when there had been no threat. If we explained ourselves, my father would smile, but I knew Hannah would give my mother the same glare as moon reflecting on ice, a glare of ancient coldness without any chance of warmth. We sat on the bed with Hutchins, our cat, eating ice cream at 8 o'clock in the morning, letting Hutchins lick out the bowls. Hutchins vanished a week after my mother died. I still waited for him. Tell me, my mother said in her secret voice, what kind of couch do you think Aunt Hannah will buy? I don't know, I said thoughtfully. I can't even picture her in a store. The image of Hannah in one of her cloth hats with elliptical brim came to me. Whenever Hannah donned a hat, it was gray, the color of a thunderhead, and when she walked, it seemed a storm front was moving towards you. I saw her moving around a furniture warehouse, her thunder gray hat on, moving slowly, checking the prices. She won't buy a couch with wisteria on it, my mother laughed. Our couch bloomed wisteria on a pale mint background. Hannah had made the comment that it didn't look substantial enough to sit on, with all those purple dots. My mother looked down at Hutchins, who was moving the bowl with the force of his tongue. It will have to be a solid color, maybe brick red or silvery steel. It would have to endure. Yes, it would have to endure, I agreed. We smiled. I only wish we had known that 2 years later my mother would get sick, that she would not endure. I only wish I had known. My father came home early the night of Julia's fire. I was lying on the couch reading Jane Eyre, a book my English teacher got worked up about. I was changing my opinion about Jane. She was stronger than she seemed. What a day, he said. He sat in the chair across from me, rubbing his forehead. What's wrong? Just one thing after the next, he said. And you're no closer to finding the arsonist in this area. And they're no closer to finding the arsonist in this area than we were a month ago. The leads have gone nowhere. How do you know it's arson? You said fires in the woods were caused by cigarettes mostly. Not these. These are as deliberately set as a campfire. I never understand what would get into a person to start a fire. What is it? Do they just get up from the chair, walk over to the window, look out and say, looks like it's time for some arson? Do you think that's it? My father said these same sentences in the same tone ever since I was small. He looked over at me, and I think for a second he had thought he was speaking to my mother. It's good to see how much you like to read, Magda. Your mother always read. You look tired, I said. I am. I think I'll put Hannah's stew on and then call it an early night. I went back to Jane. She had just arrived at Mr. Rochester's house to take the governance position, and she was gazing up the stairs leading to Bertha's tower as the housekeeper showed her around. At that moment, just as Jane looked up the stairs towards the unknown, the fish moved into my head. I had been trying to ignore these creatures since the beginning of spring, the same creatures I had tried to tell Julia about, and she told me it was just some dream. These fish were no dream. They were clearly taking up residence inside my brain. At first they were shadowy figures, nothing more than flickers of rain, or a shadow darting inside my head. And these fish had no basis in my life. They simply appeared, blocking out the world around me. I had always been able to ignore them, but this time they meant business. I put the book down. Mrs. Fish stood at a sink, washing out a series of crinkled conch shells. Around her stood jumbles of boxes and bubble wrap. She took dishes from one box and wore an apron with scallops at the top and the bottom, and on her head, at an angle, was one of those tiny fluted cups used to serve tartar sauce. It acted as her paper hat, inverted on her head so that the open part of the cup was closest to her head. She had lipstick on in the manner of a cartoon figure, a red heart covering what I presumed to be lips and a mouth. Then her mouth opened. I saw that I was right. If I ever get these dishes done and put away in this place, if you ever finish with that paperwork, then maybe I'll understand. Right now, I really don't know. I just can't tell you. Why don't you ask him when you see him? It's not like he doesn't owe us a huge favor. After all we've done from him, you'd think, "Oh, don't start that now," Mr. Fish interrupted. He sat at a round stone table looking at a series of papers scattered in front of him. "You can't go thinking that the only reason we do things is for repayment. We've been over and over this, and it doesn't change. There's one lesson here and only one. You can't trust eels. It comes down to that basic and simple truth. You just can't trust them. I wish it weren't so. I wish it were not the case, but I can't change what is." Mr. Fish stacked a pile of his papers with his fins. Maybe I can be looked at, and people can say how it's awful that I don't trust an entire species, but over and over again the eels disappoint. They bring it on themselves. In all my dealings with them, they've either cheated or, I don't even want to say. He wagged his head back and forth and returned to his papers. His eyes were shaped exactly like light bulbs, placed at 45-degree angles to his temples, tiny at the corners, then opening to a large circular bulb of silvery amber. Mrs. Fish shook out a large conch shell. "You're right, honey," she said, turning to Mr. Fish. "So right. There is just no dealing with eels. They have hearts just like their caves, dark and full of venom. I was just hoping that this one time, this one eel would surprise us. Actually, you surprised me when you told me you were negotiating with an eel in the first place." "You act like I can control everything," Mr. Fish exclaimed, raising both fins upward in a gesture of helplessness. Mrs. Fish walked over to the table. This was accomplished by rocking back and forth on her bottom fin. She sat down across from Mr. Fish. "I'll never understand why you even go there. I mean, they're not like family. With family, you might have to put up with certain things. But to go to the eels," she pursed her generous lips. You just have to stop this. It's one thing to feel sorry for eels. That's understandable. But at this point, you need to end your association with them. They're really no more than a bad habit. I suppose, Mr. Fish agreed. Who are you? Oh, who are you? I whispered. Mr. and Mrs. Fish exchanged glances, then blinked up at me. They were sitting in a translucent green substance that looked like water, only nothing around them was wet. The substance shone with unnatural brightness. It was as though they moved only within shafts of sun. It just seems the older I get, the less... As Mrs. Fish said this, Baby Fish tumbled by. She leaned down and scooped him up with one chubby fin and deposited him in a small, roofless pen. We're going to have to solve this problem no matter what, she continued. I have an idea. You're not going to like it, but it's the only way I can see out of this right now. Mr. Fish said with ponderous slowness. Just give me a chance to talk, please. Just hear me out. How can you even say that? Mrs. Fish exclaimed, alarm in her voice. That I wouldn't hear you out? How can you even say such a thing? She turned her eyes towards me. They shone, their hazel irises igniting in the sun, their lashes as long and curled as llamas. I will hear anyone out, anyone. Though I have to tell you before we even start that I see no solution to this problem other than, well, ending the relationship. Total termination. We have to visit the grave tomorrow. Oh, sorry. New place. We have to visit the grave tomorrow, my father called to me from the kitchen. The fish vanished at the sound of his voice, and I sat up in my bed, trying to pull the world back into some kind of order. Why on a Saturday? Don't we usually go after Mass? Magda, I'm surprised at you. You're usually right on top of these things. I don't know. Can you tell me, please? It's your mother's birthday. She would have been 39, God rest her soul. I heard my father leave. The fish did not come back. I woke to the sound of rain at dawn, and then it rained all that morning. My father said we could wait until the afternoon when the weather cleared up a bit, but the sky remained zinc-colored and laden, cold for spring, with raw scraps of wind. It's too late to go now, I complained, when he knocked on my door to my room at 3 o'clock. Your mother's on eternal time now, honey. She won't mind. I had to go, though I did not kneel when my father did. I stood next to him, not looking at my mother's grave or at him, but out over the rows and rows of tombstones. I waited in the car while he prayed. As we drove back home, I asked him if we could skip our usual movie and ice cream. I couldn't face sitting there with my father when my classmates writhed in booths around us like banished spirits of fornication in an Old Testament painting. This request surprised my father. Not feeling well? A little tired. I went into my room and tried to will the fish back. I thought of how my mother and I once swam beneath the pier with goggles on. We went to the bottom and watched the fish floating towards us, drifting soundlessly as angels, their fins delicately thin and fragile as eyelids in all that green dark. They fluttered past us with the grace of brides. They're like souls, my mother had told me, as we dried off on the pier, the way they float. Her sentence had scared me, and I did not know why. Now I knew why. She knew things she did not share with me, and that sentence had hinted at her unspoken knowledge. I thought of my mother, I thought of the fish, but nothing came to me until I fell asleep. Then my mother stood before me, calling me into a place where things rolled and floated, free of boundaries like gravity or physics, a place similar to space, that we could breathe and speak. We walked like astronauts across a spongy surface, bouncing along in long steps. Where have you been? I asked her. You've been gone since August. I'm back now. I'm here now, Magda, she said, rubbing circles into my palm. I'm right here. I never meant to leave you. You have to know that. I never meant to leave you and have you end up like this. She kept rubbing my palm. Magda, listen to me. You cannot go on like this with only silence and memories. But I don't want anything else. I know. I do know. We all want only silence sometimes, but it's not all you can or should have. Promise me you'll find a way out of the silence. I can't promise that. I can only try. You never taught me how to enter. My mother looked at me. She smiled, cupping my cheek in her hand. Then I woke. I sat up in bed, my nightgown soaked through, as if I had been caught in rain. I had dreamed of my mother. I saw her, heard the sounds of her drowning, and I watched her hair flower in the water, her breasts trembling beneath the water, her arms moving like light. She had touched me. "Are you there?" I whispered. "Have you come?" I listened to the long vowels of wind rushing by, and turned my head to the pillow. I could feel the place she had inhabited inside me, and I could feel that space gone, hollow now, spin within forever. Loss, grief, the words people had said to me after she died. Short words, easy to say. I thought of all the space that had been my mother's life, and I wanted a larger word, a grander word that did not fall from my tongue like water. And we're done. That's chapter 2. Hope you enjoyed.
My movie move. Web. Stop button.